Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our series continuously in mobilizing and voting, getting ready for the vote for the general elections coming up on November 8th, 2022. In regarding to the series of education, engaging and empowering Indian community especially is the series. Yesterday we started with generalized education about how to vote, why Asian Americans need to participate more. Today we have a special guest called Rishi Bagga. Rishi is not a stranger for me. He's a very good friend. And Rishi, we both started having a being in friendship from South Asian Bar Association, where we both are attorneys working in Florida, and we both are from the same district, and we do the business in the same district, and we raise our families in the same district. I don't find any more similarity than saying that Rishi is my own leader. I'm so proud and happy to introduce to all of you Rishi Bagga. Rishi is an attorney and small business owner who believes in fairness, justice, and common sense solutions. As a former prosecutor, Rishi worked hard to fight for justice for victims of domestic violence crimes. He has fought for the clients as an attorney and brought parties together to resolve issues as a mediator. Though his experience as a small business owner, Rishi understands the importance of growing Florida's economy while making sure that everyone has a fair chance to succeed. Rishi lives in Storybrook East neighborhood in the East Orlando, Alafaya area with his wife Shelley and their 2-year-old son Gayan. Rishi, welcome to the show. And this is a part of the series. We want to educate and mobilize Indian community to go and vote next few days until the November 8th, if they can, early voting, if not on the day of the elections. So welcome to the show. If you wanted to say anything before I have a hard questions on you to answer to our community.
Absolutely. Well, Madhu, thanks so much for having me here. It's incredibly important. I think every opportunity that I have to speak to people in our community and encourage them to vote, encourage them to make their voice heard is incredibly important. You know, I see myself and our family as the American dream. I share a story with so many folks. My parents left India in the 1970s. My father had very little money. He became a taxi cab driver. My mom was a bank clerk. They've slowly worked their way up, built a successful hotel business. I went off to law school and then have become an attorney and been practicing law for the last 16 years. So I think for us and for so many of us in our community who've built a lot of success, that next level is to make sure that our voices are heard in our government as well. And so it's very important that we move beyond just financial success and move also towards making sure our political voice and our issues are heard and given a good platform.
Well, Rishi, I know that I probably told you a few years ago when I met you first time in the Sabah. Rishi, you're so natural leader. You know, you should run for the office. You know, I did tell this in my office one day. You'll remember that, you know. But here you are trying to represent us in Florida, and we can't be more thankful and also at the same time more proud about is fellow South Asian trying to do this and trying to represent us, you know. Well, we all know that you're a successful attorney and entrepreneur who run the hotels and the other small businesses. But what made you to pursue a career in politics?
You know, I think there was a few different factors that were involved, but I think the biggest thing, especially as it relates to our community, is I looked at the Florida legislature and I just didn't see anybody who looked like us or who was representing, our community's interests. And I say that because, there's 160 seats in the Florida legislature. Of that 160 seats, there are no South Asians. There's no East Asians. There's no Pacific Islanders. We're very thankful we have one Iranian American, Asian American who is in the seat. But considering the number of Asians that we have in the state, and that it's a growing population, and that we have so many varied interests within that larger group of Asian, that's something that I think we're really missing out. And it's not just about tokenism or saying, it's a symbolic need to make sure that we have Asians in office. I think this has real practical policy implications as well. One thing I point to is that last year there was a proposal in the Florida House to require some level of mandatory Asian American education in our schools. So basically make sure that people understand Asian American history, culture, their immigration to this country. These basic things we want to make sure that children in schools are taught. And it's important for people to know we're here and know what our traditions and culture is. But on top of that, we've had an increase in hate crimes over all Asian American communities the last number of years. So to me, the best way to attack that is to make sure that we teach people about who we are and who our culture is. That proposal didn't even get out of committee and never got to go to the floor of the legislature for a vote. And I think that to me reflects that's not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. To me, that's a bipartisan issue dealing with, making sure that our community knows who we are. And the fact that didn't get any further, to me, reflected the fact that we just don't have enough of a voice in our state politics. So that and other things that I have seen over the last few years have really pushed me to wanting to make sure that there is a voice for our community in our state government.
Wow, that's really motivating. I hope more will motivate from you. Maybe we can see more leaders of our community, or at least for now, just go out there and vote. And vote is your voice, right? I mean, that I encourage everybody, just utilize that next few days and just make sure that you're voting to the right person, and just utilize the vote in general, regardless of the party. I mean, that obviously, if you can able to research and look for the candidates and information and what they stand for, where they stand, it really, really helps that you're helping to elect the right representative. So let's say I'm hoping that we're definitely going to win. Okay. If elected, what are you hoping to achieve in Tallahassee, which is the capital of Florida?
Yeah, well, I think, like I mentioned, that's very important to me, making sure that our community's voice is heard. And that would be something I would try to push on, making sure that we are heard when it comes to these education issues and things like that. Beyond that, education more broadly is a major concern of mine. I'm a public school kid. I went to public schools here in Orlando. I went to UCF afterwards, which is a public university. And to me, this year, we started our school year 9,000 teachers short as we were starting off our school year. And so that's a real problem to me, because if we don't have enough teachers in our schools, then how can we expect our children to have an opportunity to learn what they need to learn? In addition to that, we are in Florida 48th in the country in how we pay our teachers. Out of 50 states, we're number 48. And that's a big problem as well, because we pay our teachers so little, especially so little compared to other states. We have teachers who are leaving. And so we have to increase the amount that we pay our teachers. Until we do that, we're going to continue to face teachers, leaving our state. And that's going to become a big problem. And the last thing I'll say related to schools is we've become so political about our schools and what can be taught, what can't be taught. And those politics are also weighing on our teachers. It's become more difficult to teach as well. And so when we have those, when we've politicized, we can't talk about certain topics in our schools and things like that, that has the effect of pushing teachers away. And I've spoken to many teachers, especially over the last year that I've been running, who've told me how difficult it's become to teach. And that also is a big problem. And I think one of the reasons why we're losing that. So education is really important to me. Healthcare is really important to me. Florida is one of the states that has not accepted the matching funds that come from the federal government for us to expand our Medicaid program. And by us not doing that, we're actually leaving billions of dollars on the table, and we're also have about 1 million Floridians who could be insured but are not being insured right now. And what that leads to is everyone's costs increasing as well, because there's more uninsured people. So those of us who have private health insurance, we end up having to pay more. So all of these are sort of the common sense issues I think we need to approach, and that's what I'd like to do if I'm elected.
Well, you said very right point about education and health, which is the major points. That all over the country, I guess, that make me to start asking the question as a woman, or in general as a human being, What is your position on women's reproductive rights? Is this something government should be regulating?
Well, I view women's reproductive rights. There's two ways to look at it. On one hand, there's the right of just being left alone and being able to make your own decisions, right? And to me, this is, anybody who has to go through, an abortion or these sorts of reproductive procedures. These are incredibly personal decisions, and I think they should be left up to the woman, to her family, to her faith, however she wants to be informed, her doctor, rather than having the government try to dictate this. But the other thing I think we have to look at is that abortion rights are reproductive rights, and reproductive rights, quite simply, are just healthcare, right? And this is a question of, are we going to give people access to safe healthcare, or are we going to take this right away and then move in a direction where unsafe procedures are taking place, where people are turning to a black market, or trying to go to a different country just to get their basic healthcare needs taken care of? And I think that's something we really have to worry about. For 50 years in this country, we had Roe versus Wade as the standard, and that recognized a constitutional right for a woman to have an abortion. It did it because they thought of it as a realm of privacy. And when we've changed that, we've actually made this law a lot more uncertain than it was. We had some certainty before. Now we've moved in the direction of uncertainty. And the last thing I'll say is, a lot of people don't realize Roe versus Wade was a compromise. All right. The court in that decision, and this was 50 years ago, the Supreme Court actually weighed two factors. They weighed whether or not, they looked at the right that a woman has for privacy in her own healthcare decisions, and they looked at the protecting an unborn life and the government's right to doing that. And they actually went through, balanced the two of those, and drew a line at the third trimester, saying that there was a place where one right was overtaken by the other right. So I just think it's important to note that Roe versus Wade was a compromise. It was trying to wrestle with a very difficult issue, and it came up with the solution that everyone was relying on. So I think now what we have is uncertainty, and that's a problem. So if I was elected, I would basically ask that, or I would support codifying the protections in Roe versus Wade into Florida law.
Well, Rishi, you spoke that as a true lawyer, man. You explained the case law very. It's important, right? You need to know that why that even came in effect. I know we all wanted to go against it, but you should know the basics of it, where it stands. But that was very clear. Thank you for explaining to the viewers. Well, coming back to the Sunshine State where we are now, where do you stand on climate change?
I think climate change is an existential threat to this state. It's something in this state in particular we need to be worried about. And if anything, if you look at this past hurricane that we went through a few weeks ago, thankfully, and hopefully, Mother, your family was fine, mine was fine. So many families in this state were incredibly affected. There was so much loss of life in the state, and it was partially, to me, because of climate change, right? This state in particular is particularly susceptible to hurricanes. We have two coastlines on the East Coast and on the West Coast. We can get hurricanes either way. For a lot of us who live here in Orlando, which is the center of the state, we thought we were immune to some of the worst effects of hurricanes, because we always thought that you have coastal flooding and nothing really affected the interior of the state. And I think we had a rude awakening to know that no, in fact, we have flooding in the interior of the state as well. And so many of our lakes and streams also flood and affect so many homes. So this needs to be front and center in all of the policy we make. Now, the last few years, the governor has talked a lot about climate resiliency measures, which basically means let's get the infrastructure we have and make it more climate proof. I think that's good. That's not great, because that's only dealing with the effects of the problem. It's not dealing with the cause of the problem. And so I think we also need to speak about the cause of the problem. How do we actually stop these effects from before they happen? And, while we're not going to be able to do all of that, because we are already well on the way to our climate warming, what we can do is at least try to stem that increase. And we can do that by encouraging, for example, solar adoption. right? This is the sunshine state, which basically means, like you said, right? It's a sunshine state, which means we have, such a great resource in our very sunny days. We could be pushing people and encouraging people and having tax policy which encourages the adoption of solar power so that we have less reliance on fossil fuels. Same thing with, we need to take a good look at where we allow building. Right now, we have so much development in the state. Part of that is because we have a lot of demand, but we're not always considering whether that development affects the ability to have floodplains in areas where flooding can happen. And instead, we're making more homes that are susceptible to flooding. So we need to take a hard look at what we do there. Same thing with, these are difficult questions that we all need to examine. We should be pushing for our state's fleet to be electric, and we should be pushing for the adoption of government cars and vehicles to be electric where they can, because again, what we can do, what's in our hands, we need to do to try to prevent the worst effects of climate change. So, those are just a few elements. I think the bigger question is your philosophy. If you think this is important, which it should be, then this should be front and center in all the policy decisions we make.
Agreed, completely agreed. That recently look at the hurricane. That even though we always say that Central Florida never affects, the flooding just washed off. Every mile it's so different in Central Florida. Yeah. And obviously our prayers and hearts goes to the Southwest Florida. It just swept the whole thing, and thank you for making sure that, people heard about it, how important we all have to center around the climate change, mandating the solar energy, just using the natural resources as a treasure, it's so important. Well, you touched earlier the topic about education and the lacking of the teachers and the salaries and all those things. I don't know if you're able to connect this one, or maybe it's different. For me, it's so important. Obviously, my kids grow up in Florida, and especially to the District 35, well, Florida is lagging behind most of the country in education standards, when you compare with a lot of states and achievements of its students. What should be done to help our students become more competitive in this global environment?
Well, look, I think it's a great question. I'm going to go back to my earlier response because I think that this is a big part of it, right? Is that we do need to make sure that we pay our teachers and we try to attract more people into teaching. The best and brightest should be teaching. There's ways that we can deal with our teacher shortage. We have a teacher shortage. First, let's recognize that. And part of this, I'll also add to the mix that for many years, Florida has been experimenting, and I call it in many ways, an experiment that has not always been successful in privatizing our public schools by moving some of those money into charter and private school vouchers and things like that. But we've seen some of the effects of this, which is pulling money outside of our public school system and putting it into other schools. And that's where I think overall you'll see we've had outcomes in education that are equal to or worse than are the outcomes in our public schools. So this is why I focus so much on public schools and making sure that our teachers are paid and that our teachers have the resources that they need. So first things first, let's pay our teachers, right? Let's attract more teachers that 100%. Are there. That's incredibly important. I also will say, and I alluded to this earlier, there are some policies that we've put into place that not only negatively affect our teachers and make it a more difficult environment for them to teach, I also think it makes it less competitive, or our students less competitive in the marketplace. So I'll give you an example. There was an act that was passed last year. They call it the Stop Woke Act. Okay, but basically what this act did is it took out, or basically discouraged, and we can go into a full hour on this issue itself, but what it did is if it prevented schools from including certain discussions of race or history where those discussions might make somebody feel bad, in short, right? And what that has the effect of doing, it does it not only in schools, it does it in the corporate places. What this was geared towards is diversity education. So basically, it's taken away schools' ability to talk about implicit bias and diversity and things like that. And it's done that both at the corporate side and at the school side. Now, it's important to note on the corporate side, it's actually tied up in a lawsuit right now. So this has currently been blocked and not been enforced against companies. But either place, I think the refusal or the inability or, tying people's hands behind their back to talk about diversity and bias in both our schools and in our corporations makes us less competitive, because every major company talks about this. We know we live in a global world. And so our kids are going to have to participate in companies, and they're going to have to, they're going to have an education that is going to require them to communicate with and work around the world. So if we can't have basic discussions of diversity and basic discussions of bias and these types of things, which, all companies are doing, all major companies are doing around the world, they're doing this. If we can't talk about it because it makes some people uncomfortable, I think that makes us less competitive. And it's also making our teachers less comfortable teaching in the classroom. So they're actually leaving the classroom. So all of these things, I think, go into place, right? I mean, this is not the way to have a competitive workforce in our future, and it's not the way to best prepare our students. So I think these are ill-conceived laws, some of them that have been passed. There was a lot of discussion of the Don't Say Gay bill. I think it basically does the same thing, but talking about gender. When you make it more difficult for good teachers to teach, I think it has an effect on our students. And so that's the problem our schools face, and we need to do that. Another thing that was passed this past year was the ability to ban certain books. And I'm really a believer that, maybe it requires a lot of work for parents. They call it the, parental responsibility bill. I think it's the other way. I think it's trying to make parents not responsible. Ultimately, parents should be responsible for what their kid thinks or how they're taught, right? And we're taking away their responsibility by just banning books completely. I think all students should have access to all education. And then, let the parents guide their morals and values as they see fit. But that doesn't mean you take away a student's access to books. So I think all these things are kind of going the wrong direction. And I think we see where states are more successful in education, they don't have these types of restrictions. So, we need to encourage a strong learning environment that has, open as an open education system where students can talk about issues without having to worry about getting in trouble, where teachers can bring up certain issues and expose their kids to certain issues without having to worry about, getting in trouble or the teacher getting, losing their license or something like that. So these are all, to me, connected issues. And I think if we strengthen our system, our schools, and we empower teachers to do their job and actually teach, then I think we're going to have stronger students for it.
It all starts with the paying them right and treating the teachers right?
Absolutely.
That I can't agree more with you, especially on thank you for touching on the topic of the diversity and inclusion. That it's so important. Everybody in the world is applying that one. Why not we? And why not in the schools, right? That's where the whole education starts,
Yeah, well,
and thank you for all the values, you standing for it. I can't agree with you anymore on this, regardless of the party. That that you always stand for the fairness and justice. That's what I really love about it, and I can't wait to see you out there as a District 35 candidate and win over, in less than 1 week. Okay, what do you want to say to our viewers, or especially to the fellow Asian American, South Asian, and Indian community? We have less than a week, and we need to make this happen. Especially our community is very less participants in vote. Either they're not emotionally connected to that, or they didn't find a right reason to do it. But we all know that we have more reasons than anybody. We are well educated. We are the biggest taxpayers. We are contributing to the community, but yet we are not yet there to take our chances to vote or to be as a leader. What do you want to tell to our community? What do they have to look for? What is the reasons for them to come out and vote and utilize this right?
Look, I thank you first of all so much for this opportunity to speak to all of you. It's been a wonderful experience. The most important thing that our community can do is vote. And again, I say this: if you're in my district, I would love your vote. If you're, but even if not, if you want to vote against me, that's okay too. I don't think we all have to agree on everything, but the most important thing we should agree on is making sure our community does have a voice, right? I mentioned this in the beginning. One of the reasons I decided to run is because I felt that there was not, I have always felt that our community isn't speaking to politicians and our politicians are not speaking to our community, right? And that's a two-way street. How do we speak to politicians? We vote. That's how we make our voice heard. That's how we tell them what we think matters. And until we do that, we can't expect them to come back and talk to us. Right? It is not enough for me. We have now moved to a place. It's not enough to have politicians who come to our mosques, our mandirs, our gurdwaras, our churches, and just take a picture and then leave, right? Without actually addressing the issues that are facing our community. That needs to happen. I talk a lot about healthcare. I don't know all the answers with healthcare, right? But what I will tell you is so many members of our community do. When it comes to the Indian American community, Asian American community, so many of the healthcare workers who are affected by this pandemic, who are affected by healthcare policy, that are affected by insurance issues, those are members of our community, right? But when the policy is made, who's talking to us and asking us what our thoughts are, right? That's not happening. When it comes to education, education is central to our lives, especially as Indian Americans. We value education so much. Right? That's been our way of success in this country. So why aren't our voices being heard when it comes to education and education policy? And it's not, the reality is our voices won't be heard on this until we make our voice heard. And we have to make our voice heard by voting. So again, regardless of who you decide to vote for, wherever you live, wherever you're getting this message, I'm just going to ask you to vote. Do what it takes to make sure you vote. There's a lot of wonderful resources out there. You all have, computer access, internet access. You can look it all up. There's a lot of nonpartisan sources too. And so you can look into that, look into your local newspaper, look into Vote 411, which is put on by the League of Women Voters and is a nonpartisan, resource. There's a lot of resources like that. Ballotopedia. There's a lot of different sources you can go to that will let you examine these issues and come to your own decision. So that's the one thing I'll tell you is come to your own conclusions on this, research, know what you're voting for, and then go out and vote. It's incredibly important.
Wow. Thank you, Rishi. I know that we all talk at the dining table so much about this, but you well said that, until we take action on this, it's just going to be conversations, continued conversations, I mean that we think that we Asian Americans, we don't have any problems. We don't have to vote. Don't have to raise the voice. Let's talk about it. Look around, the immigration backlogs, constant problem with the immigration, that's a big problem, obviously. We are talking about it. We are saying that 20 years wait time for the visas. But unless we go there and talk about our problem, nobody else going to talk about us, the hate crimes, continuation of everything. I know these all matters to you, and I say that, a lot of parents, especially with elderly, right, they don't want to go vote, it may not be affecting you directly, but you're investing for the future. This helps for your grandkids. This helps for your children. So there is a reason for all of you to go vote, everything counts. And obviously, it is very important to see the people like Rishi to get out there and see that he's one of us. He's going to be listening to us once he gets there to Tallahassee. And we wish you good luck, Rishi. And do you have any final message to our viewers before we wrap up this one? Other than just go vote.
I think that's it. Yeah, go vote. If you want more information about myself or our campaign, just go to rishibagga.com. There's all kinds of information that's on there. And the last thing I'll say, Mother, is thank you for your leadership. You've been a leader in our community for such a long time, and I'm thankful to have your leadership and see what you're doing. I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, Rishi. We all inspire from each other. With that, I want to close this session by saying that everybody just go vote. Can't wait for the results for the November 8th. The first step is just go vote and just learn more about the candidates and make the right decision, Educate, empower, and engage. That's the motive of this elections, And well, thank you, Rishi, again. With that, we're going to end this session.
Thank you, Madhu. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for the short notice, and you look so tired, and you came out to talk about this, And hey, whatever it is, we are trying our best, right? Maybe
Yeah, absolutely.
next time we'll start
We're
this
out
ahead
there
of the time.
knocking on.
Yeah,
We're knocking.
we
We're out
have to
there
do
knocking
everything
on
we
doors and
can,
calling people. So.
And the first time I'm going to see a brown out there, that's a big deal for me, That's a big deal for the Gayan and Krishna who is going to go out there for the next generation. It's important, right?
Absolutely.
Well, you get some rest. I will talk to you later. And
Thank you, Madhu.
please let us know how we can help, and can't wait to see that result.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.